computer and um, see if you, there we go. Approve. Did that work once for you? Okay, great. Um, I will pause for comments or questions from anyone on any topic throughout the course. Thoughts?
Hi, I was just thinking of submitting a memo on Tocqueville, um, and I was thinking that it would be a
Can we see
bit
your
on the
face?
short. Oh, sorry, my room is just a bit of a mess, so that's why I'm my camera's off. But I was just curious as to like how to go about submitting, just either emailing you or posting it on the discussions page.
Both is good, please, and
Okay.
to Yuhan, why you as listed on the top of the syllabus. Send
Yeah,
everything
okay.
to those and to the Canvas place is fine. So the other students can see what you're doing with the via Canvas.
Sounds good.
That's,
Thank
that's the idea. And it's fine to have discussion and exchange among you students in what you say and read about each other. And that's fine. Anything else? More anything about Tuckville, about thoughts you want to share or ask? What's your content? Tuckville.
And for me, it was just kind of like summarizing and asking questions about his Democracy in America's chapters 1 through 5. Particularly, I was a bit confused about his like differentiation between equality and freedom, and so that's just something I was asking about in my just wondering, like posing questions really in my memo.
Okay. Well, it's Tocqueville is clearly being debated in many different ways, and so these are all good themes. It's not a question of him being right or wrong. As you can see in our title, Can Tocqueville Karaoke? That is, there's something wrong about Asia or about the Western theory from Tocqueville. And if the Asians are doing darn well in many things, in terms of simply clearly the economic growth, uh, so as I mentioned, the conference in Seoul with people from China, Korea, Japan, especially. Why is it different? And so it's a good starting point for where and how does participation differ in Asia. And the quick bottom line, just to remind you, is that this is Seoko Kim, who did his PhD here, um, but back and forth, and noted the large, that is, at the time he was working for the NORC and for the ISSP, the international version of the General Social Survey, which is the same data that were featured by Carrie Wu 2 days ago. His bar charts were from the GSS China, and so these items were developed initially internationally, and but they are comparable, so you can compare. Beijing, that is the biggest cities in China, have the data broken out between separately, say between Shanghai versus Beijing, and then with Toronto, and some other biggest cities in the world. But it's mostly national data. They're sample to represent the citizens of the nation. But the bottom line there is the citizens of Korea join more organizations than do Americans, which most Americans and maybe most Koreans didn't realize, but like Americans, as Tuckville looked at them, they were mostly churches, and churches are especially salient in Korea. They do more evangelical work. This is the Joseph Yee theme. The last two presenters had these kinds of overlapping concerns. Joseph Yee himself is Korean. Uh, um, Groups like the evangelicals do a lot of proselytizing, trying to bring other groups, non-religious, non-Christians, or Catholics to join their evangelical group. And they've been so successful in Brazil, where there was a long Roman Catholic Spanish uh, strong, heightened by the Inquisition when the Spanish were settling there. The very strong Roman Catholic tradition was today replaced by the evangelicals. That is, they're more on, if you look at the persons in churches on Sunday in Brazil, there are more persons in Jehovah's Witnesses and other evangelical groups like this than there are in the Roman Catholic churches in Brazil. Similarly happening in Africa, Indonesia, I won't say specifically exactly, but in major parts of Asia and African America, uh, Africa, Latin America, including Mexico, and other locations. So the by contrast, the traditional Episcopalians or the Church of England or the um, Roman Catholics in most of Europe and the US are not acting evangelically. They're not using the social media actively. They're not sending out missionaries. And the numbers are decreasing relative to the evangelicals. So and they're not just talking. They are that is not just talking about religion. They are talking about politics. So in Brazil as well, the former prime minister was openly, strongly, visibly evangelical, and there was a group of the elected officials in the National Assembly called themselves evangelicals who really worked together, voted together, and helped elect the prime minister. Okay, so those are how things have really changed in terms that in ways that are very different from the traditional specifics. So, but I've answered as well, not uniquely specific to one country or one region. That is, these kinds of dynamics are happening across these regions, across countries, in ways that may also be, in some elements, more top down than bottom up. Not just the Massachusetts farmers building a fence together, but you may have the Mormon church in Salt Lake City has a lot of money, and they require, basically, this is true of many of the evangelicals, to be a member of the church, you need to do, say, 2 years of evangelical work around the world. So these are important civic, political, social media kinds of activities. Okay, so in that sense, what you have illustrated in these presentations, both by the two speakers, Joseph Yee and Carrie Wu, both of them pointed out, the recent speakers, that the specific dynamics in different countries differ. So the specific dynamics of the U.S. are not the same. It's not that this is spreading the world the same way. How religion works in different ways have complicated, interesting specifics. Just as within Europe, the Northern Europeans are different from the Southern Europeans with their Roman Catholic background to the south. You did not have the counterculture. So one of the answers is the family is stronger in Asia, and the family is stronger in Italy and Greece and Spain. You had much less of the counterculture in those Roman Catholic societies to the south of Europe. But the Northern Europeans, the Scandinavians, the British, the Irish, maybe, no, sorry, let me take that back about the Irish, Roman Catholic. The the English, the Welsh, the Scots, the Danes, the Northern Germans, they had a lot of the counterculture, green hair, blue hair, uh, more kinds of things which were more visible in the counterculture than the family, where today there are a number of 30-year-old men living with mama who's still cooking pasta, and there's enough, which is and the welfare state has supported has to help this has been funded people who don't have jobs and who are living with their who don't have regular jobs. And so it's a PhD on this in details in Spain, for instance, by one Spanish guy. This is 20 plus years ago. So these specifics are the workings of the welfare state transform the ways that the family works. Okay, so let me stop there, and we can pursue any one of these from anyone else. One thing, if we, depending on how we do in questions, Q&A, is we may, if you are comfortable, Anzi, if you want to talk a little bit more about your rushed 10 minutes with your PowerPoint, if you still have that comfortably available, you could talk a little bit more about what you presented and try to frame it, if we can think it in terms of some of the themes in the course. Maybe think about that for, if you want it, Anzi, for a couple of minutes. We'll see how the discussion goes here. I'll ask myself if there's anything. Well, there are lots of things that are in the readings that I minimally talked about. So there are all kinds of things that you may have scanned or saw in the reading, or I said it too cryptically. Follow up, ask a question. And I can ask you a couple of questions if you don't ask me any. Do you have any notes? One way is Haley Thomas. I'm trying to remember, with your permission, if we could see your face and just mention where you're from. Trying to get a flavor of different class participants.
Hi, can you hear me?
That's fine. Yes, please.
Okay.
Where are you from, Haley?
I'm from Florida.
Yeah. Where in Florida?
Like Central Florida, like a farm town.
Okay. And Florida has become politically hot these days with Trump there, and the governors have been salient as well. Any thoughts from as a Florida resident that may led you to think about any, or how about your town or your surroundings as you grew up there? Did you grew up your whole life in Florida?
Yeah.
Tell us about the town and any experiences you had there, which may contrast with, yeah, what year are you now here in Chicago?
I'm a second year.
Okay, so in a year and a half in Chicago, any experiences that really mark this as different from Florida, and then different with things that made you feel somehow what we said in the course or in the discussion didn't seem to connect with what you saw in Florida. That is, not that either any of this is wrong, obviously, but where and how can that is if it's this is a good question for all of us. Where and why are our own backgrounds not seeming to work with the reading? Then then let's try to ask why. Why doesn't it fit? How does that fit about, say, is your town, how was your town different from what you've seen in the city of Chicago and then the university in Hyde Park?
I think that my town specifically, I think it aligns with a lot of the readings, especially like that of Tocqueville and sort of concept of like American exceptionalism. I think that I came from like a pretty small intact town where people were mostly like pretty close knit in that sense, and very very religious, very like uh, um pretty much like all the same. So in that sense, you see a lot of the concepts of like unity or whatever, and like the religious drive that makes like America unique in the view of like Tocqueville and whatnot. As compared to Chicago, in my experience here, you see a lot more diversity, like, and a lot more of the points on like I the point on like karate and God on the South Side. You see that like come forth a lot more. I've tried to become involved in a lot of like nonprofit work and like volunteer work to help people out in this area. So I see a lot more representation and a lot more diversity, which like warrants more the like the growth of different activities that unite a sort of community. So I think just a lot more development here as compared to.
So some of this may be big city, small city. So if you went to Tampa or Miami, it might be more similar to Chicago. Do you have that feeling or not?
I actually grew up in Tampa for the first like 10 years of my life. So comparing there to the like small town I moved to, I think Chicago is still fairly unique as compared to Tampa in my experience. I haven't been to Miami or that many other big cities in Florida, but even like Chicago has this sort of like melting pot feeling that's very unique in the sense that even if you go around Tampa, you like you sort of only see one lens there. Like nobody really talks about anything except for like the downtown area or like the business elements. Whereas in Chicago, there's a lot more of a conversation going on about different problems that arise, and there's a lot more of a sense of community. Like in Tampa, there was a lot less engagements that I noticed as compared to like here in Chicago.
In engagements in what sense?
For example, like even like big events per se, like and like community engagement, like all the Hyde Park specific events, the neighborhood specific events, and like unions or whatnot. There's a large sense of community in that element, like in Chicago, specifically within like Hyde Park, for example, like South Side neighborhoods. There's like a big sense of like unity and connection within specific neighborhoods, which I didn't really see living in Tampa. But I'm sure if you went to different cities like Miami, I'm sure you would see that a lot more.
Okay, so what I think you're adding, I mean, I asked about size. Your answer is more in terms of neighborhood in the sense, or community in the sense of neighborhood, but also perhaps ethnicity and the salience of ethnicity and the diversity of ethnic diversity. My sense, I have casual data on Tampa, is that it has a more homogeneous white Anglo-Saxon Protestant and more Midwestern um, background, whereas Miami is more New York City, more Jewish, more um, uh, cosmopolitan in that kind of sense. Um, and then explicitly, very importantly, the connection with Latin America. So you have many Latin American elites from Argentina, from Chile, and they have apartments in Miami, or they're Europeans, or they're Austrians or Germans who have apartments and condos in Miami, even if they're only there for a small part of the year, and they may or may not let it sublet, whatever. And then there's a lot of Latin American investors and finance people. So that those kinds of things are make Miami very, and then we've got some people who've moved from New York, like Trump himself, uh, and others. Uh, the largest investor in Chicago and Illinois moved to Miami about a couple of years ago, because he was trying to get the mayor to crack down on crime and to be more responsive to security and other things like that. So he said, if we can't be responsive to make this, etc. So he left Chicago, although the his name is the beginning of the Department of Economics, and he also funded one of the two bike paths. We now have two bike paths next to each other, and a lot of the bike front, all the way from the whole city of Chicago and the lakefront, etc. So the these activities are interesting, divertive. But let's come back. That is a good example we're having right now is, how can we start from one town, like my town, or two towns, say Tampa and your two towns, and your small town where you've lived later, and then adding Chicago. So seeing Chicago, if we have these three cities, in a sense, we can try to say, why are they different? And if we just try one, or so we're adding, say, population size, ethnic salience, neighborhood diversity, which then put on these events and activities in Hyde Park with those examples. So yes, these are important differences. And they make urban life different in specific neighborhoods. But the salience of ethnicity is very strong in Chicago throughout its let's say 1880 onward. And in much of the American South, you did not have that. That is, it's not just those two Florida cities, but you go across anywhere, including Texas, Houston, Dallas, etc. The biggest cities in the American South, people will talk about Mexicans, perhaps African Americans, and then either Anglos, or they may say Anglos or Wasps or whites, and that does not differentiate between Poles and Italians and Greeks and Irish in ways that more actively used in the newspapers and in public meetings in New York, but even more in Chicago, where ethnic politics is heightened by the 50 members of the city council. There are 50 aldermen. And so that is explicitly done to enhance the salience and the political impact of small ethnic groups, which could still have a neighborhood of people living nearby who may come from Lithuania or Korea, but obviously especially black and Mexican. But then within Black and Mexican, there people can come from one town in Georgia or one town in Mexico, and these people may live together, and the mayors from Mexican cities or small towns will come and visit Chicago and San Diego and say, you know, we had a bridge washed out with a flood. Could we raise $3 million? And they raise the money by Mexicans from that village now living in Yankee, New York, or North, not New York, North, abroad across the border. So in that sense, and then in turn, the Mexican national government fosters this, grants, it does matching grants, encouraging mayors to do that kind of thing. And so the funding can come from the national Mexican government in the same way that the Mexican national government will provide teachers. They will pay the teachers so that you can have proper Mexican taught in high schools in Chicago or in San Diego or in Houston. And so you have talented and articulate Mexicans doing this as teachers who are not paid by the Houston public schools, but by the Mexican. So in that sense, we have so Chicago welcomes these kinds of activities at the city levels. This is more middle level. It's not national. That is clearly, we've got a big battle right now, as you see, between Trump versus, and this will happen, I think it's this week and next week, the mayor, the Chicago is being singled out, not singled, it's not unique, but it's the most salient case of fighting the governor, Tony Preckwinkle, the city council president, and the mayor are being, and they've all made public statements that they're fighting against Trump, they're fighting against his policies, and they're doing these things to continue its welcoming tradition of immigrants. And that in contrast, just for example, at the local level, Los Angeles is the opposite. Los Angeles has been much more fighting against immigrants and has traditionally, through the 20th century, this is not last few years at Trump, this goes all the way through World War II. I mean, the Japs were fought in LA. The LA, there's a lot of defense industry, a lot of people, and we're closer and feel the Orange County, those kinds of diverse, I said aspects of disagreement and conflict, even within today, civic groups among ethnic boards of boards, including board members who disagree even more. That is, they have less civility, I'm told from informants who've lived in both places as they go back and forth, than in Chicago. So we have the heightened, that is, City Hall is trying generally to encourage these sorts of neighborhood festivals, and they do, and there's something like 3 times as many of these festivals as they have in New York, even though New York and LA are larger in numbers. The neighborhood specificity has recognized the salience of ethnicity of neighborhoods, and the mayor has facilitated this by having one place you could knock on the door of the mayor's office to get lots of the police to come and help patrol, to have others who will give you the permits that you need to have noise, to have music playing. You can have later bus stops and so forth. And when you have, say, a long weekend festival, which is for a Polish or a Greek or Asian Indian neighborhood. Okay, so these kinds of differences go back and clearly are there, but they are not unique. That is, you have Toronto has many, and Vancouver have very large numbers of immigrants internationally, and it's very different from the rest of small town Canada. So we heard a little bit of that from Carrie Wu, who did his PhD in Canada, and he's a professor in Canada now at York University, and so he's more salient, and of course Dan Silver. So we say that scenes has been heightened substantially by as a Canadian a Canadian kind of concept, and the Canadians perked up when I mentioned that once or twice. Further questions or comments that Haley may have on Florida. That is, you hear what I'm not mentioning anything about Trump or recent differences. I'm pointing to longer term differences between especially Miami and Tampa, but in that way, I'm trying to give you examples of trying to go beyond proper names like Miami and Tampa. And if we want to do social science, we want to try to explain away the proper names and to try to figure out what things together make Miami different from Tampa and so forth. Haley, do you want to add any other possible factor for Florida or your three towns that you've seen yourself? Or anyone else who wants to throw out a hypothesis? Yes, go ahead, Haley.
I think you covered a lot of great points on it. I think it's hard for me, just based on my knowledge, to identify distinct factors without like further research that separates them. I mean, like you said, a lot of like ethnic diversity is a big factor compared to like the towns I've been in. And like as such, communities and neighborhoods are built sort of around that. So I think beyond that, even like geographically, there's a big difference of culture. Like Chicago, like the Midwest holds a very different culture than say the Northeast or the West Coast, which I think you can tie to a variety of reasons that you would probably have more of an opinion on. So yeah, I would agree with everything you said.
Anybody else have a hypothesis about how Florida is different? Okay. Raphael, Nayan, you started to turn your screen on. Anything you want to add or ask?
Well, Florida different from Chicago. Is that what you mean?
Either on that or anything else. You've had good observation. I mean, you've been a good informant about Chicago and also pointing out things that don't fit the normal politicized police, black conflicts, for instance, and say that neither of your parents and neither of you were really active in any civic or other organizations. And so in that sense, that's showing that the average, I won't say average, I just saw something as a new paper for tomorrow, if you want to see a workshop on this, that it's a presentation on the workshop on computational social science, is on trying to take away the extreme social media postings and focus not on the middle, the larger number of people at the middle who are not so politicized and who are not active in the extreme ends of the two tails, which get so much more social media mass media and newspaper attention but the people at the middle are still larger in numbers. And so it's the guy from Carnegie Mellon who's been modeling. He has something like 26 million individuals trying to analyze where and how their connections lead them to different patterns from those who are more extreme. So, and that's part of what Haley was talking about, that people are more connected in the small town, and you're pointing out you're in a big city, bigger in this sense, and maybe part of that is simply we have fewer small town like personal relationships, or they may be more structured by family narrowly defined or something else. But any comments on that? Sort of starting mentioning some of the other factors of differences, but anything else you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I think like to that point, as far as like cities being less closely knit and more just like a melting pot, like New York or Chicago, for example, I think it sort of connects to like what Carrie was talking about last class about public trust. So when you're surrounded by a more diverse crowd or diverse group of individuals, I think these urban areas sort of serve as like a small facet of the world. So in that way, you're more of a global citizen living in a city than you are living in some small town in a more rural area. So I think that can sort of serve to give you a more broad outlook on the world as a whole, which connects to the last class. And that can sort of, if you're surrounded by a different group of individuals, you feel like you're more connected to everyone beyond your tiny sliver of the world. And that makes you like trust a broader swath of people, I suppose.
Yeah, I'll just mention one kind of number. I think I may have dropped this off a couple of weeks ago. maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago, when we had a question that was asked in many of these international surveys. What do you feel closest to? Your neighborhood, your city, your nation, or the world? And for instance, in Yugoslavia, people felt close to their their republic, their region, and the whole country of Yugoslavia broke apart. So did the Czechoslovakia broke into half, the Czech Republic and and the other. But the world were about 10% of Americans, and virtually nobody in Europe or anywhere else, anywhere in the world mentioned the world except a small number of Americans who thought in world terms. At least they felt closest that way. Today, the Europeans, they're a good chunk of the Europeans are up there to 10-15%, and the Americans are higher still. So the diversity in the sense of the global experience has clearly made a big change that is very simply quantitatively measured with that kind of item. But it's new. And it links with probably the dynamics of social media facilitated by cell phones, etc. Anything you want to follow up on your points through the class?
Yeah, I think that's a good point about social media. So it makes like your small your region or your neighborhood, it makes those sorts of personal connections less salient, and then it makes you more interconnected with the rest of the world. So I think that could sort of serve to explain why more people, if you ask them now, would feel that they're more connected to the world than they are their personal neighborhood. and it makes people more of global citizens than citizens of any one town or city or state or nation.
The answer you've just given, I think I may have mentioned before, when I was teaching in the core course called Power, I had people read. This is 5 to 10 years before the Bowling Alone book. There's a paper by Putnam that had the same idea that um, civic engagement is lower, and do we have less legitimacy because of that? And these were predominantly, majority were first year college students. And I said, what do you think about the Putnam paper? The clear majority said, Putnam is wrong. We know from what we do in our own lives, what he's telling us is wrong. And I said, really, please elaborate. And so one guy elaborated in a very excellent paper, and he focused on Orthodox Jews who were Zionists and gays, and said these are two groups that have active social media that connects with gays on other campuses. This was probably 30 years ago. So there were, gays were still in the closet. Zionism was minimally discussed, at least, outside New York, whatever. In this sense, those two, so then the follow-up question was, what are you most close to in terms of social media or your own friends in your own dormitory and the library and those people at the University of Chicago personally? So he found different interesting ways of measuring each of those, and they were very strong. And so the social media group were brought the hearts of those Zionists and gays who felt much closer to their gay friends on the social media than they did people who were sitting next to in class or seeing personally in their dining halls or in the library. And so in that sense, it illustrates your point that the cosmopolitanism can in turn potentially build a sense maybe of legitimacy of fellow gays, but where and how they work together is different than the Putnam personal relationship, where he has worked in Southern Italy and he's lived in Southern Italy himself. He's really following that, and okay, so I'll end there. Two of you have been more visible. Jake, you want to, or say, unless Raphael, you anything else you want to follow up on these points? No. Okay. Jake, why don't you follow up with something else?
Yeah, I wanted to actually continuing on this topic, talk about how, so I mean, I live in Montana for half the year, and it's interesting to see. I mean, I live in like right outside the city of Bozeman, and Bozeman is, I think, the number one fastest growing city in the country right now, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and it's interesting to see like how community engagement and like civic engagement is like developing as the population increases and as it becomes more diverse. And I mean, as far as like, for example, like churches, the community that I live, with, are very engaged in, um, you know, re religious things, religious activities. So like with the church. But as you get closer to the city of Bozeman, it's more, it's shifted to kind of, I guess, more like generally civically engaged, if that makes sense. So more kind of like, um, I don't know, diverse activities, and less engagement with simply just the church. Um, I don't know. I just thought, that it's, that might be an interesting point, and to kind of get your perspective on how um, the development of like a small city like that, a rapid development rather of a small city like that, um, can change the sense of community, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, it's an excellent point. I'm looking over here at I'm not finding what I was looking for. A PhD on African Americans and the church started with a finding, and we had a national sample, big numbers of people, and it asked citizens going to churches what and if the minister talked about in the sermon and talked about politics and political activities and the like. And it was generally low in the established churches, often Catholic and Episcopalian, for example, whereas in the African American churches was the opposite. Lots of discussion of politics explicitly, saying get out, work for the vote for this candidate, vote against that other person nationally, locally. And so where and why this, so it started with that kind of political question. But if you look further, what there are a number of interesting surveys that have been done by churches nationally as well as of individual ethnographic studies. And basically the simple finding is not only is documented in each of those kinds of methods in many studies. In the American South, African Americans were so excluded, you could say, or not present in the white civic organizations like the Lions Club or the Boy Scouts were predominantly white. And therefore, the African Americans, if they were smaller in numbers, especially, but even if they as they tended to be large, the churches stayed within, that is, the African Americans stayed within their churches, and they did things with African Americans together, and they did not at least, and that has continued up to the present today. So you have that tradition when slavery and the white-black lines were so strong that led, that is, if, as I put it to you, as a feudal order slavery tradition lives on today in this post-industrial society in Bronzeville where I live. And so you see these differences, a sense of Black power and of church. So there are a number of the ministers in both the big Baptist churches as well as the evangelical smaller Baptist can be, but there's a black Baptist as well as a white Baptist kind of group. But the simple point is it fits exactly with what you describe in Bozeman, and it links with what we heard with Haley about the small town. She didn't mention race, but I would imagine that those traditions in Florida probably still will, if we look for the Florida data, and how much do you talk about politics in your church? It would be higher among African Americans than among whites, whereas the whites could be active within the Democratic Party, within the Lions Club, within the League of Women Voters, with a white feminist group, and these could be secular organizations rather than just the church. So in these differences, which we can say the proper name of Bozeman versus outside, or African Americans versus whites in the American South, if we push a little further, we see it is not something which is racism per se. It may have been racism 100 or 200 years ago, but now it's continuing, even though, and then I ask questions like that. I mean, I talk to my neighbors in Bronzeville, so, I say, isn't this part of the South? I say, the South? I never lived in the South. I don't know anything about the South. I don't want to go there. And I say, but that's why, isn't that part of why we're different in Bronzeville between Bridgeport or Hyde Park? Oh, those are just different neighborhoods. This is not Bronzeville. And so that the sense of, or we're right. There's a standing up. There's the highest pedestal is Douglas. Anybody who knows who's the Douglas in Bronzeville? He's the Douglas who debated with Abraham Lincoln. The famous Lincoln Douglas debates went on across America and across initially Illinois. And basically Lincoln was more against slavery, and Douglas both they were both against slavery, but they both Lincoln was more outspoken, and he became president, and that led to the Civil War, even though it was clear. But the point is, Douglas was and so Lincoln was from downstate. Douglas was from Bronzeville, and he owned a lot of property here as well as and so the one thing he wanted to do was to enhance the value of his property, and he was senator, was to build a university, so that he created the University of Chicago. It's now on a mall right on King Drive. It ran out of money. It collapsed. It was closed, right? It's around 1870, 1880, and it closed down. And then a new university in Hyde Park, which is what we're now part of, and they got money from Rockefeller, especially at the beginning. But the point is, Stephen Douglas stands on top of a pillar. If you ride up, take the bike or take a bus, there's a pillar of Stephen Douglas. And I talk to people who are high school teachers in Bronzeville, and I say, isn't it ironic that we have this white pursuit? I won't say supremacist, but the guy who took he fought against Lincoln and fighting against the Civil War, and he stands right there right now. And don't we have? Whereas at the same time, people are over there, they're knocking over Christopher Columbus and other people further north. Christopher Columbus is no longer on a statue in the middle of the loop. The mayor had to have him removed and be waiting still in a warehouse until it may become more calm, so he can be back on a pedestal. But nobody cares or knows about this, even in Bronzeville. So the simple point I'm making is, people may not know the specifics of history, but you now have heard about it, and maybe you remember this, and you can see this as a way that these historical events live on, and say, oh, that's part of Bronzeville, but it's not. But why is it specific, and why is Bozeman different in ways that may be generalizable? Reaction to that, Jake? Does that seem consistent with what you've heard, or any other thoughts about that don't fit with what you've seen in
Yeah. No, I mean, I think as Bozeman becomes more um, ethnically diverse as well, there seems to be a shift in the churches too. I mean, I've attended a church in my small town and then a church in the city, and it seems that there's been a shift towards more of a politically charged, I guess the churches have just become a little bit more politically charged in as you get closer to the city, um, especially I think towards the election season, whatever. Um, yeah, but I mean, I think I think that's consistent with what you were saying, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Oh, it could be, I mean, that one of the, I mean, there are multiple hypotheses that I've sort of talked about, but one might be, could it be who, as I mean, as you've gone to the churches, both in the smaller town outside, but then within, you're close enough to you can go to both. So you can potentially see differences within the ministers, within the kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
It may be with two churches and right there when we don't want to overgeneralize, but might it be that some of those folks living in Bozeman who may have recently also, we add another factor, they've recently migrated to Bozeman because they hated LA and and that is lots of the traditional people have left LA as the basically especially the Latin Americans but and Mexican have become much more numerous in its politics in ways that people have left and gone to places like Bozeman. Now, might there be in Bozeman people who may go to the church, but who also may be active within a Republican Party or a civic organization which is not within the church, such as a business association, a Lions Club, other things like that. So they may not feel they have to be politically active. They may also be politically active within the church, but maybe less so because if they really want to be active politically, many of them could go to say a political party. Think of any conversations you've had with anyone like that, or is that too subtle?
Um, Not that I can think of. I mean, I agree with the fact that there are people moving away from big cities um, into the state of Montana, especially Bozeman, as it's growing pretty fast. Um, yeah, and I mean, I th yeah, I think it's pretty consistent with what you're saying. Um, but
Yeah, I have a niece and her husband. Her husband is a Mormon from Salt Lake City, and they live right outside Bozeman. And so I hear some I hear some of the stories from there as well. But they don't talk about politics at all. I mean, their friends talk about skiing, about the snow, and they do hunting. Um, just sent some pictures of partridge hunting, and they've got the dogs that run back with the partridges. So they have four partridges which they're eating now this week, sending the photos around, and the others are saying, "Oh, animal rights, what are you doing? How can you be shooting animals like this?" And so all of this is going on. I'll just mention for fun that they just to show you the diversity that you can have. They were both skiers. They both loved to ski, and they got better and better. And she became the American national champion in powder snow skiing downhill. And then as she got to know other people as they practiced the year around, they were ski bums, basically, you can call them that. They would go to Chile when it was summertime in the North America. They'd go to Chile and keep skiing, and they'd go to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc. And so her husband was the man who is the male national downhill champion in powder snow skiing. So that's what they talk about. They ski and they're outdoors and they love that, and they don't talk about politics. Okay. So, but this illustrates the Philip Converse kind of point that people may be passionate about downhill snow skiing or powder or whatever, and or partridge hunting, but they don't talk about the Republican or Democratic Party at all. Who else has a commentary or any from you? Anzi, are you still there? You want to talk a little bit or ask more yourself?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sure. So I'm originally from China. I live in New Jersey for 4 years for high school, and then I moved to DC for 1 year, and then spent another year in Shanghai, and another 2 years in New York City, and then 2.5 years in Chicago. Well, later this year I'll move back to New York City as well.
You want to talk about any of your PowerPoint?
I see the PowerPoint. Okay, let me pull it up. Give me 1 or 2 minutes.
Either from that, I mean, either the pictures and or if you just want to talk about it. Well, I mean, you made some very good points, but you had to go fast. But you get a little bit of the background as well.
Yeah, let me find my PowerPoint.
And I'll add, he went to NYU for college and studied sociology and math, and then is getting a master's degree in computational social science and going to a PhD program at Columbia. So that just the cities and the fields come together, and he's doing all of them very well, as you can see. So. If you want to see the discussion, I've mentioned a couple of times, there's another one that was very interesting on fake news by a guy he's an Italian. He has a PhD in physics and another PhD in computational social science. He's professor of engineering in Indiana University, but he's talking about fake news. And he had one of the best presentations in these workshops this quarter. And you can see he's got a website, and I can't give you his. I'd say if you look at the presentations of the workshop in computational social science, the winter quarter, you can follow up with the guy from he has an Italian first name. It's like Filippio, and his last name doesn't sound Italian. It's more East European or German, like Franzer, begins with F, I think, Franzer. But the computational social science people some of them have got really nice PowerPoints. So yours is great, but you didn't have enough time. So anything you want to either show us or talk about it?
Yeah, I'm sharing it right now. I'm sending the request.
Okay. Whoops. Let me do that with here. Okay.
Right. It's blank, right?
It's what? Yeah, it's still black.
Yeah.
Okay. When we went to parks during the pandemic, there we go.
Okay. Well, just before I go over my presentation, like, is there any specific parts that interest you guys, or you guys wanna ask questions, or like you guys want me to answer your like more general questions, like what is computational social science or extra, or you can just ask me in the advance, so I don't have to like go over everything one more time.
Good questions. Anybody? Okay.
Not.
Go ahead with something that's more that you've passed over rapidly.
Yeah, sure. Because I don't really know like which specific part that you guys are interested in.
We've only got about 10 minutes, so we got to be brief. So one or two things.
Okay, sure. So I guess I'll just leave it here. I can talk more about computational social science if any of you wanna pursue it PhD degree in the future, especially in sociology. I highly recommended you guys to consider doing computational social science. Well, it does not really require strict like a background in either CS or statistics or mathematics. Well, I guess you can just learn it during the PhD, but it's really a how best describe it? It's a really interesting point, as James Evans just won I think it's 20 million NSF fund, right? Professor Clark, if my memory is correct.
Yes.
So which means that computational social science, I'm not really gonna say it's the future, but it has a great potential, and a lot of questions remaining unanswered. You guys can do a methodology, but I guess that requires a background in computer science. Or just like me, trying to apply the big data or AI or various machine learning algorithms in social science. Well, for example, in my research, I collect approximately 169 million Google business reviews and use natural language processing to categorize them into different topics. For example, in my research, the US park research, I'm trying to study like why people leave reviews, like what their intentions are. For example, they want to show that they prefer the quiet environment, they prefer the clean or tidy environment, or they just want to walk their dogs in the safe parks or extra. By using the natural language processing, I can categorize those 169 millions of reviews into those categories to systematically study like what people really want. Well, another application of computational social science in urban research is the study of environment. By using Google Street Views in the satellite images, we can perform an image recognition method. Or for example, when we after we collect after we collect like approximately 10 million satellite images on 10 million parks, we can analyze the percentage of trees within each park, the percentage of lakes in each park, and the percentage of, let's just say, whether there's a tennis court, whether there's a basketball field within each park, which help us to categorize different parks, and also to analyze like combine what we have for natural language processing. We can systematically study whether people are satisfied by the appearance of this tennis court or basketball field or just lakes, or vice versa, whether the appearance of lakes improve the visitor's experience. I think that's all the things that computational social science methods can help in social science research, so that we don't have to send out a service or interview people. I'm not saying surveys and interviews are not important. I'm simply saying that there's another way to collect more data and perform accurate studies in a faster rate, at a faster rate. So that's some general perspectives on computational social science. And right now, me and another TA, Yu Xuan, in a couple of students from computational social science program are collaborating on projects to validate or expand the scene theories. That's what we are gonna do in the next quarter. I guess that gives a brief background of what computational social science is and how it can be applied to or urban research.
Well, AI is all over the press and mass media and so forth that you can see. It's being highly discussed everywhere. Within, you mentioned graduate and undergraduate, there are different versions of this, that certificates are available if you're majoring in economics or in pre-medical work, biology. You can get a certificate in computational social science along with that kind of major in something else. So what the program is expanding to probably a doctorate, a full doctorate, but also multiple levels of activities, including these weekly workshops where we have smart people from all around the world. I knew nothing or minimally about AI until recently, and so I've just joined the program in the last year or so myself. So I'm interested in learning about it and trying to learn from people like these MA students who are taking five courses every quarter, and they're teaching me little bits of stuff, and it's been exciting.
Yeah. Also regarding the AI, I think the combination of AI and the Google Colab platforms really enable us to do a lot of computational research by using Python. Like, we don't necessarily have to know how to code, but we can just ask GPT to write code for us and then copy and paste those code on Colab, which is directly connected to Google Drive. Like, we don't necessarily have to know how to code in order to do computational social science. I think that's another advantage, like living in 2025.
Indeed, indeed. Now, I started another large language modeling, LLM, is another label for accessing Google. So Google doesn't just have pictures of streets. Google were leaders in putting all of the texts in millions and millions of books in all of the libraries of the US and the world and so we've got all kinds of things that they're words, and what Ansi talked about is natural language. All those words in all those books are now accessible. So you can look at how did Shakespeare say this, and how did that change with Goethe? How did Abraham Lincoln's speeches connect with average people, or Uncle Tom's Cabin, or the French Revolution? All kinds of things like this, from pamphlets to great works of art, as well as public speeches. are different ways of capturing. So that is when I did a paper decades before, trying to capture in the late 19th and into the 20th century. What were hot citizens leading to World War I? And World War I could see after 1904, clearly there was a big shift as the French and the Germans both started to get ready to fight each other. And the popular novels, the popular issues which they were reading were no longer secular and scientifically doing things together. They were fighting against each other in a romantic kind of different series of activities. And so the novels of the past and so there are now people I'm sitting on committees, I'm seeing students doing this in majoring in French, in Italian, German. They're taking those kinds of data and they're measuring the style from Goethe and whether those framings differed from the French at the same time and where and how those continue through the late 19th century up to present. So anyway, somebody's trying to call here. Let me try this for 1 second. Who's calling, please? Who is calling, please? Yeah, I'm just finishing a class. Can you call back in about 5 minutes? Very good. Okay. Lucas, you joined us recently. You have good things to say. Anything you want to add? My laptop isn't working. Okay. Can you speak at all, or you want to type a question, or maybe there's not time for that. But if there's anything quick and easy, go ahead.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, we hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is for you. So, like, is there a specific reading or topic that you've discussed this year with us that that's your favorite?
When I'm asked about favorites on things like that, my answer is the same as you've heard. Well, that is every city, every small town, every rural area has its own charm. And I would say what I have tried to do in the scenescapes analysis, where we give you 15 dimensions, we don't just look for rural, urban, or one thing which is good or bad, but look at the many different ways that make Bozeman may also differ from Tampa and Miami. So these are tools that is looking for these kinds of tools which you've seen clearly most explicitly in the Scenescapes book, but you've seen it implicitly in the other things which I may have written, but as you see, I've learned from Max Weber. I would say everything on the reading list in some respect is a favorite of mine, but those that I felt were more important, I gave 2 more stars. And it wasn't just because it was my niece or something like that. It was because I felt that they would be more important to you and others in seeing how these themes around global local politics come together in ways that have not been recognized in the past. Any follow-ups?
From me or just everyone?
Yeah, maybe from you, as you had been. We're right at the end, so any last minute from you or anyone else?
Oh yeah. My answer to my question of like a favorite reading would probably be Sassen's like The Global City. I really enjoyed that one because it had me thinking about if Chicago would be considered a global city And in my opinion, I think it is because like it's a major transportation and logistics hub. Like it connects us with like a bunch of global markets. So I'd argue it is, but like I would like to know your opinion. What do you think?
No, for sure, but the Boschkin paper shows there are many different dimensions of globalization, and if you take science, places like the university towns of Austin, Texas, or Berkeley, or uh, Madison, Wisconsin, these are small towns. These have more global scores than do New York, Chicago, or London or Tokyo. So in that sense, it's not all of New York, it's Wall Street. And so she features a lot on Wall Street and the Wall Street nannies and so forth. And so I pointed to the strengths which she has joined the socialist Leninist tradition of focus on inequality and conflict among classes as being one theme, uncited though, with the lifestyle and consumption, which may or may not fit with the globalization in the factors in the ways which she does discuss. So I'm saying read and read critically because these are, as you saw in in that section, that I didn't talk too much about, but there's a Dutchman who did a PhD blasting Saskia Sassen. So it's good to see not just her as an individual, but those ideas could be made more rigorous and more coherent and tested. And he does this in his PhD. Okay, we are past time. Thank you, folks. I've learned in each class as I do in talking with each of you, and look forward to more as we will in the future. Yeah, I'll teach culture and urban innovation next quarter. Cheers to you all, and I'm sure you've done very well in the midterm, and I'm sure you'll do well and better on the final. And let's keep in touch if we can help with anything else. Bye bye to all, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. All right. See you next quarter.
Okay, yeah. Any follow-ups on my let me stop the recording here first.